Wake up, everybody. It's time for the History You Forgot podcast, the podcast where these three veteran teachers with over 90 years of teaching experience help you remember all the stuff that you probably slept through when you were young. And today, it's random acts of history. What does that mean? Better hang on. Here it comes. I am Jason Schmoida.
I'm Jeff Breedlove.
And I'm Jason Jones.
Welcome, guys. How are you?
Hey,
We're spending a lot of time together last couple of days.
We actually have. Yeah, I'm actually looking forward to this episode. This will be fun.
Yeah, this is going to be different.
So why don't you explain what we're doing?
So this is kind of the, it's random acts of history, and it's kind of a grab bag / viewer mail type thing. We've gotten hit up by people over the last almost year that we've been doing this of topics. And rather than deep diving, we've kind of made a list of some stuff that we thought would be interesting in terms of what people have said to us. And we have the grab bag,
Our random acts.
our bucket of popcorn acts, and there is just stuff in there about history.
There's like 50.
Yeah.
50 events, terms, concepts, people.
We just cut up pieces of history, and we're going to grab and go and see what we can do to riff on them and do our thing.
I'm a little nervous.
This is kind of like, you know, what would happen if we got together on a normal day and just chat.
One of our former colleagues that's now retired used to kind of do this. He called the game in class Stump the Chump. So hopefully we aren't chumps today.
I forgot about
That's right. That's right.
All right. And then we've got 3 drinks.
Yeah.
Right. So to kind of go on the random acts, we're going to go ahead and roll some dice or a die.
Yeah.
And we'll do what? High roll gets to choose. We have
so martini,
vodka martini. We've got a Negroni, and we have a just bourbon rocks.
Yeah.
Right. All of them obviously made with local Kansas City liquors.
For
so
sure.
thanks to
From
Fox
Fox
Wine and
Wines.
Spirits
Very good.
again. And I'm really actually impressed with the local Kansas City distilleries. I mean, they're getting really some good stuff out of them.
I haven't traveled and asked other cities people what their city's, distillery life is like. But man, we've got some good ones here.
We do.
We really
we do, and it's fun that that's what they provide us. When people ask,
Yeah, I agree.
it's fun to tell them we're drinking Kansas City stuff.
Yeah.
I like it. And we'll go ahead and do a little quick shout out. If you'll see, there is a mug, right? A little, I don't know, I guess, full on merch, right? We are going to start with a history merch site, which will be coming soon. We'll put a link through the bottom of in the comments.
So we can have it on, I think we can have it on Spotify, YouTube, Instagram.
Great.
Yeah.
So we'll get some merch up. We got mugs, which we went ahead and bought, as you can see, right? We'll do probably like t-shirts or hats or something, but we'll get that up. We would love it if you guys would buy some merch, start spreading the news a little bit, right?
And if you buy some mugs, maybe we'll go with bobbleheads.
Oh,
Some bobbleheads.
I often feel like a bobblehead. All right, so we'll do what? High roll gets to pick the drink, and
Sounds
that way,
good.
so we'll just go ahead and go. Crap. 1. For those listening.
Oh,
Five.
5. All right,
man.
Let's do this here.
Oh,
Six.
6.
Kind
Kind of a sucker for the Negroni.
Great.
Going with
I'm going
that.
to take the bourbon.
And I get a straight up martini.
But it's exactly the way you like
So-
it. Which
Oh,
is
yeah,
perfect.
it did work out pretty well, didn't it?
Here we go.
Cheers to the random acts of history.
Random acts of
history.
history.
Random drinks of history here.
Yeah, a little bit of random.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but I was like almost think I should somehow prep, but I mean,
Yeah,
all right.
and you can probably, if you watch, you can see we do usually have some paper because we just have an outline, just a guide.
Right. That's good. Yeah.
But this is kind of fun to not have it at all and just see what happens. So
We're going to find out if it's fun.
we're going to find out we might hate
Stump the chump.
Right.
That's
First and last.
Right.
Somebody asked me that. I was at a family get or something, and somebody was listening or watching the podcast because they mentioned, they go, "Oh, do you guys have it all sort of scripted out?" And I said, "No." When they go, "Well, how do you guys plan?" I go, "Well, we kind of sit down, we outline it, and then we just go." And the friend of mine was like, "Well, God, you must have a whole bunch of takes." And I was like, No.
Yeah.
Basically one.
Right.
Right. I mean, it's
If what we've put out there took a bunch of takes, that would be really terrible.
right. I mean, that's what they said. They're
That's
like,
the
how do you know all that stuff? And I said,
Yeah.
well, if you had been doing what we have been doing for
Yeah.
30 plus years,
Right.
you could also riff on whatever you do.
Right.
Yeah.
Another. So,
Well, and it's like, it's one of those things where we've made mistakes. I mean, if you
Right.
listen, we've had to
we
go
make
back
up
and
stories.
we make up stories, evidently.
Maybe that's what
Yeah.
we should do. We should come up with the greatest like falsehood or
True or false?
right that we
Right.
ever told the kids, right? And then see if everybody out there knows. So
That's too
funny, but yeah, the merch will be coming. So hopefully we'll get a few people to buy. It'd be great. Start spreading that around.
Love
You'll be seeing us wearing it.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, should we go ahead and
Should we do it?
You bet. I'll
You-
go first.
All right.
I'll go
Yeah, I was
first.
gonna say, get in there.
All right. Let's see. I may have to put my readers on. I'm going to have to put my readers on.
I think I put like 32 points.
Right.
Uh-oh.
Story of the potato.
Oh,
Oh, which goes with the vodka.
Right.
It does.
Right.
Okay,
Uh.
I can get a little bit of that.
All right.
You probably can.
Go for it.
If you
Not at all. But no, I'm curious.
I'm
very
guessing that
curious.
the story, I mean, okay, so I know, right? Like the story of the potato.
This is exactly
one
where
thing in
we're-
history we could talk about with the potato is the
I
Irish
know, like,
potato.
yeah.
well,
And
and
that's
let's start even earlier. Yeah, that's where I was going.
Yeah.
So I always make sure you remember like exchange, right? So when Europeans came to the New World,
Yep.
there were lots of fruits and vegetables that were indigenous to the New World, but they did not grow in Europe.
Right.
And what I thought is ironic is these are often vegetables that we now associate or fruits with European countries.
Yeah.
Like the tomato was not Italian, it's a
right.
New World. The
Right.
potato is not Irish, it was New World.
Right.
Yeah.
And others, right? You know, that whole sort of cultural relativism. So the idea is that the potato, which eventually, I think it's the Incans who grew the potato, right? The Mesoamerican civilizations, when the Europeans took them back, they were a little sketchy because they grow underground.
Mhm.
So they were, dark at night and, the devil's land and things
Well,
like
and
that.
those potatoes weren't like Idaho potatoes, right?
No, yeah.
Like a big baked potato, like
Right.
we used to.
Yeah, right. But then it turned out that there were lots of people in Europe at the time, right, who had been having their land confiscated by nobles or earls, or the idea of land ownership had become more and more selective.
Yeah.
And so people were having to grow more or better food, more sustainable food on less land. And I know that this all coincides with the English takeover of Ireland, which had been going on. But really, I think it's right before Cromwell. They ended up taking most of
Right.
indigenous people's land. All the Irish have no land. And the potato will grow literally
Anyway.
anywhere.
Yeah.
And so the Irish would grow it like in root cellars under their house or on a little tiny spot of land. Right? I mean, that's
Yeah.
and then you can hit the next, which is
Well,
unfortunately, right?
Well, then with the potato famine, and if I remember history correctly, and I may not here, they were growing potatoes, and they were still selling those potatoes to the English when their people were starving.
Right.
The
Well, I
Irish
think it
were
was
starving.
forced to.
Well,
It
Yeah,
was like
and they had been
made
a
right,
force,
yeah.
but they were still producing enough potatoes probably to not have a famine.
Right.
But the English were either forcing them to sell or they were selling them to the English, and that just further hurt Ireland.
Right.
Yeah, I think
So,
if I remember again, but something like 60 or 70% of the typical Irish person's diet come around 1850 was potatoes.
Well,
Yeah,
Because they're, straight up carbs, right? So you
Right.
can get a lot of energy. And I remember that. I think they had to sell them to the English because it's the only way they can make money outside of being paid for sharecropping, basically, right? But then 1850s, we get a blight, right? We get a
Correct.
disease that eventually then starts harvests, and it wipes out not only next year's harvest, but the harvest you already picked. And so we end up with a huge number. Do you have any idea the numbers?
I don't remember.
I think, again, like weird obtuse history. 3 million, I believe, Irish at the time. 1 million of them, okay, don't quote me on this, but something like 1 million like migrate away,
Right.
right, to other parts of the world. 500,000 or some, huge number. I mean, it decimates, right? The Irish. There's still all sorts of monuments and stuff to the famine if you go there. But the irony I always say is that a vegetable, right, that came from the New World back to the Old World became so important that people became dependent on it for everything, that eventually a blight causes the people who live in Ireland then to come
back here.
Right. So, it's one of those kind of, twists of history where
This was the first really big wave of immigration to the United States were Irish. I mean, other than the original
time.
Yeah,
right. Yeah.
Right, just before it, but yeah.
But weren't they conscripted, a lot of them? Like, fight, they get off the boat and you basically pay to fight.
Yeah, that's the way I understood that too.
Potato, like you say, full of starch, full of energy, but also hearty, right? Fills you up.
Sure.
So,
Well, that's actually one. I mean, with regard to the large Irish immigration to the United States during that time, a lot of that had to do with the fact that there was promise of land. Like a lot of European destinations
100%.
wouldn't have had a promise of land, whereas we had promise of land. So
None of them. That's the whole reason, right? That drove. We talked about this before. Is that all the land was taken. Right. So if you wanted any opportunity,
frontier,
ownership, and that kind of goes then into the 1850s. I mean, we're building a railroad too, right? Where a lot of the Irish then set to the forefront to build the railroad.
Yeah.
I mean, the most dangerous, low-paid
Irish
jobs,
and Chinese.
Irish and Chinese, right?
From East Coast, West Coast.
Yeah. And then I think that's again, right? So a vegetable that gets sent ends up coming back here, and the people who are here because of it end up building most of the industry. But that's that wave of immigration, right? You started with Irish, and then you end up with. But there's that, you know this, wouldn't it? Like that's that whole nativism, right? That it's like a nothing party or
absolutely. 1850. I mean, it was as that wave was occurring, there was a backlash of quote unquote nativism, which is a good little ism to throw in there, actually. Where the argument, which if you're listening or watching might make you chuckle, is that only we who already live here are Native Americans, even though they probably came from Britain or somewhere else.
First, second generation, maybe. Right.
But the idea was that the Irish were going to taint that culture. They were going to change that. And obviously there's a little bit of a rivalry historically between the British and the Irish as well, which I think played into it. But
so it's was it anti-Catholic feelings too.
And
right?
that was a concern. That was literally, you say this, so the Know Nothing Party. I can't remember their official name. There was an official name for the party, but they became known as the Know Nothings because a lot of times they were asked about some of their tactics that they would use against the Catholics and the immigrants, and they just would say, I don't know what you're talking about. And so they literally became known as the Know Nothings because they were kind of underhanded in the way they handled immigrants. So
now we got to figure out what that party was.
I don't remember the American. I'm sure there was something in there where it was like, but I can't quite remember the full name.
I think that's a good one.
Damn, we got 12.
We go
10 minutes on potatoes.
I was going to say it's time for a new topic.
I think it is.
Who's up next? Me? My turn.
That's also my potato.
Yeah.
I'm digging for an American history topic.
Well, that was sort of an American.
No, it was right. Trickle-down economics.
There we go. All right,
trickle-down economics. Well, you can do this better than I can, but I'll hit it with this. In U.S. history, at least, this probably goes back to the 20s. And in the 1920s with Coolidge and Harding and then Coolidge, there was a Secretary of the Treasury who literally believed that the way forward for the country would be to embrace free market because previous to the 20s, there'd been a progressive movement where there was a little bit more government added. And so this was a backlash to that ad. And the idea was the rich know how to make money, know how to produce stuff. We want to produce stuff. Let the producers produce. And so this is technically, I think, known as supply side economics. The idea is help the suppliers, give the suppliers more opportunities to supply, and then the goods will go from there. And you would have then wealth trickle down from production, ownership to labor, and so on.
Right.
Yeah, does that sound right? Economics guy, right?
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. There's two ways in which economics believe you can grow an economy: supply side, which is trickle down, and then demand side, which is FDR's New Deal, right? New Deal. The government spending. But the idea is supply side is that supply creates its own demand. So if you incent not only the wealthy, but if you incent businesses by lowering tariffs or lowering taxes to hire more people, if they're making more goods and more people have jobs, then people will buy those goods, right? So they'll then increase supply because producers will keep on,
Yeah.
making and making. And so you end up right with it. It works, right? I mean, the thing about both supply and demand side economics is they both work.
Short term, especially.
Yes, and
Yeah.
the supply side just takes a little longer.
Mhm.
The trickle down does, right? Because it's
Yeah.
easier if you're all of a sudden get a check in your pocket. Yeah,
So-
it says
So is trickle down and supply side the same?
yes.
Yeah.
Right. So,
Right.
and of course, people our age relate that to Ronald Reagan, President
Absolutely.
Reagan. And you just said, Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong here, that both of these work.
Yeah.
Because I've always, well, this is not the right way to say that. So what creates the huge discrepancy in wealth from those who are supplying to those who are the producer or in the factory making it? Right. It seems to me like what we've seen over the last 50 years or more is that the really wealthy keep getting really wealthier.
Wealthiest.
And the person in the factory doesn't necessarily get wealthier.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. You probably might have a better sense of this, but I mean, Reagan is the one everyone knows about, right? Because it was such a shock again in the '80s with that whole sort of neoconservatism, right? That true sort of small government, and the idea was, yeah, I mean, you give the money back to those who know how to make money, and
Yeah.
they will invest it in the stock market, and they will invest it in making their businesses bigger and hire more people. And if you give the rich people tax breaks, they spend it on stuff, right? And that's kind of how it works. Well, it was not very popular during like the rough times of the 60s and the 70s, right? When we're
Right.
with government, with a lot of governments in Europe, especially going to socialism, even in the US, you have a shift towards lots of
New
government
Deal, yeah.
involvement, New Deal, even post-war.
Great Society in
Right.
the
In the
60s. with
60s and then
Johnson.
eventually Carter in the late 70s, right,
Yeah.
with the recession. I mean, at one point when Reagan comes to office, the Federal Reserve has to, drastic measures, right? Because inflation is 13 or 14%.
Yeah.
The dollar is almost, lost value. So they literally go and they restrict the money supply, right? And it just, everything goes nuts. But Reagan comes in and he goes, that's wrong. And we flip it, right? And was it David Stockman? Is that who his budget director was?
Oh, boy.
I can kind of picture him because, but it was a big upset because all of a sudden you stopped, you don't, there are more handouts, right? So you cut entitlement programs, he was the one who cut school lunches by arguing that ketchup is a vegetable.
It's a vegetable.
Right? Or that trees cause pollution. So we don't need as many national parks and, safe areas because, I mean, it's government regulations that are cut. So all these people who own these factories can get richer and then eventually trickle down. Again, it works, but it's slow. And it doesn't, to answer your question, it never trickles all the way down.
Well, and part of it is the way it's handled. Like if you remember, if you ever listened to our Great Depression episode, we talked about the demand side idea, government kicking money, and it works at least short term too. But the problem is that over the long term, government has to recoup its costs by raising taxes, and you never see that happen. I think the problem long term with supply side is there has to be some commitment to the trickle down. There has to be some willingness to let wealth really expand. And when you feed wealthy people with more wealth, they're not always going to deliver that benefit to their employers. I think that the trickle down is really,
I would argue,
syrupy.
A millionaire dumping money into the stock market, which is great, right, isn't going to get into his employees' pockets. That's his or her wealth increasing.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's exactly the argument. Or they're going to buy themselves a fancier car or something. Right?
Or another house.
Right. But I do think that what you're saying, Jason, that eventually what happens, right, if you do trickle-down economics, in theory, you can then cut taxes because the government is also having to pay less, subsidize less. There's fewer government handouts.
Unless you expand the military.
That's the problem. Is so you end up lowering your tax base. Yeah. Your revenue coming in, but you increase your spending. That's what got Reagan in trouble.
Or you don't tax
military
businesses, or you don't tax, there's companies right now that don't pay
but
very little tax.
That's not even, that would be, I guess, a supply side concept. Like, what is it? Amazon or whatever. They paid like $0 last year. So in theory, then that they should do, right, is they should reinvest that money in Amazon and therefore hire more people, create more goods, make more goods accessible. And again, it's that people kind of overlap politics with these a lot, but they're just economics ebbs and flows, right? So this is
and I would say anymore since the 90s, both parties have bought into both theories. There's not really one that fits the other perfectly anymore.
When there's not small government anymore, and there's
no matter who you are,
what party you're part of. There's not nobody's fiscally conservative anymore.
No,
yes,
they make claim it.
Or if they are, they're doing it in a way in which really isn't fiscally conservative.
Right. I mean, so you are fiscally conservative when your opponent's party is in the White House.
Oh, right. Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, it doesn't matter who it is.
Yes.
You're going to complain about the deficit and the spending and the debt and whatever it is if your party's not in charge.
Because it always falls on deaf ears if you
seems like it. Yeah.
You're up.
Jeff. Nice though. Again, I think we're doing okay.
It's not so bad.
Not so bad. Not so bad. It could be worse. All right, third choice. You ready? Oh God.
Really? God? Is that the
that's it? Religion is the topic, everybody. 1066, the Battle of Hastings.
Oh.
I know some.
Yeah.
Ish.
By the way, this is proof so far. Potatoes and that is proof. We didn't plant these.
Totally, because I never would have put history of potato in there.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. This goes back. When we teach world history or European history, it kind of glosses over. I mean, you teach it probably further back than I used to. Like when I was doing AP, it would always be Renaissance, and you said like the late Crusades of the late Middle Ages. But 1066, we're talking, early Middle Ages, right? I mean, it's like the only thing I got is Battle of Hastings is William the Conqueror, right? It is the battle between the Normans of what we would now call France and the Celts, the English, the Saxons, right?
Right.
They conquer England, right? So ends up overthrowing an English tribal system with a king, and William the Conqueror then becomes King of England. The Battle of Hastings is sort of one of those critical points because it's they're all still Norman, right? I mean, it's kind of a long term, but it's one of those epic battles, right? That history has sort of changed on it, right? The Normans, which is kind of like Brittany, France, kind of where it is now, came across and beat the English, and nobody, I think, thought they beat the English at this time. What I don't know are some of the specifics around, like who was king or what the line was, or
Yeah, I don't go back and teach that battle. We look at the Middle Ages to teach feudalism,
right,
and to teach kind of the social order,
and the changes.
And so that's why we start there and then go right into the Renaissance and Reformation.
But this is a good one because I know enough just to be aware of it.
Yeah,
right. I mean, in terms of, but I do know that William the Conqueror is the one who built Tower of London. Right. So if you ever get a chance to go to London, and with the keep in the middle, it's an old style fortress.
Right.
And then he ends up sort of dominating the entire English island, by beating sort of all these sort of English nobles and English kings, and then builds these series of defensive castles all around. I mean, there's a lot of, I think, side stories, but I do know that it's the Norman conquer of England. I bet
that's kind of the bottom line turning point, right? Is that correct?
Point. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And in my brain now, I'm going to be way off, but I believe there was some sort of, again, here I'm going to be nerding out, a question about who was going to be the heir. Like a king had died, and I believe there was a daughter and a son who were and a grandson, where we were all kind of fighting for it. One of those kind of things. And then they were unable, right, when William comes over, there's not a unified front necessarily, right? Because some of them will side with William, thinking they're going to become king or queen or whatever, And so I think it ends up. There we go. There's my deep dive for this evening.
Right? That's really freaking good. Honestly, I had no idea.
Look that up because
that's one I
was even going to ask. Is that so? When we teach about all of the British-French wars over the years, is that maybe an early precursor to those, epic years and years wars between Britain and France?
Clearly the British and the French have had 8 centuries long sort of animosity.
Right.
Yeah. What I don't know is if the Normans were actually considered French.
Right.
Like what you and I would know as French. But I do know it kind of sets up when you kind of do that early Middle Ages. in England, even up until Middle Ages, right? Literally controls like half of France. What we would know as France today, right, is because of this, right? That they have that whole sort of Western side, and then even as far back as like Eleanor of Aquitaine, right? There are lots of English titles, claims to lots of huge parts of France, and so the French kings would have to go back and forth across the English Channel, right? It was a kind of a treacherous to keep both of their lands, right? So some of those what we know as French cities were English strongholds for a long time. And then when France unifies, So I think even for a while, the English kings would have like King of France, like they still had claims, which is probably sets up, Jones, what you're talking about, like that 100 Years' War and stuff, right? There are multiple claims by English kings to territory in France.
Right.
There you go.
So that's the history. When I learned it in college, I could not follow. And the funny thing is I'm a big fan of Game of Thrones. So now it's more interesting to me because you really get an idea where that, like this family and that family and this idea. And
I love
it's
this
just crazy. Yeah,
I know.
it's really interesting. No, it's great.
I'm a dork. So sorry, that's good to begin on that one.
Oh, here we go.
All right, let's do one more.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe a couple.
We might give a couple. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Deep
Too good, one iffy.
We're not doing like a 2-hour podcast here.
Yeah.
Just keep going until the box
We
is
can
empty.
just keep going.
All right, Jones, be good.
Oh, the apartheid.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
South Africa.
South Africa.
All right, we'll start.
Yeah. So I'm not going to be able to give you a year that the apartheid started. But what I can tell you is the Dutch and then eventually the British are going to settle South Africa. South Africa. The Dutch treated the natives much differently than the British. When the British came in, the British were very interested in the diamonds and the wealth of South Africa. They kind of pushed the Dutch further inland, and then when South Africa becomes a country, the apartheid much later, the British settlers that are still there, or the British ancestry that is still there, creates this very I'm going to use the word racist government that is going to 20% of the population, and they're going to set up laws that don't allow the black South Africans to own land, to use lots of the public areas. There's very
Institutionalized segregation.
Yes, very much institutionalized segregation. And then, of course, you get a guy like Nelson Mandela, who is going to end up being imprisoned because of his pushback to the apartheid, and then eventually become the president of South Africa.
Yeah.
If you've ever seen the rugby movie with Matt Damon, he was responsible for that.
Victorious? What is that called?
I can't remember.
It's Victor, Victoria. It's not Victor.
No.
What is that called?
But that was his
Invictus.
Invictus.
Good job. That was Mandela's attempt to bring worldwide notoriety to the country of South Africa now that they had kicked the apartheid to the curb.
Well, there's a Cry Freedom.
Yeah, Steve Biko.
It's the story of Steve Biko. That's such an awesome movie. I went into that movie thinking, I don't know much about the situation. That's great.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Denzel
Washington and Kevin Kline. Yeah, it's like old too.
Well, Invictus is good.
I don't think I've seen Invictus.
Yeah,
I don't think I have.
It's good.
Yeah.
The only thing I think about apartheid that I remember is early 1900s is when it becomes sort of an institutionalized, right? And I remember from those movies and things is that, so apartheid is just, it's Native Africans do not have the same rights as white Africans. And so, even Bantu, so there's homesteads where blacks are only allowed to live in certain areas. They can only come out at certain times. They can only have certain jobs. They have to have papers on them at all time.
So some of you listening may have seen African spelled with a K. Because was that the Dutch?
Yes, the Dutch.
That's the name for the Dutch.
Afrikaners.
Right, Afrikaners, they still speak that. I mean, that's still the native Dutch language of South Africa, but it is an offshoot of the Dutch, right? So,
Now,
but I don't remember, and this is the British and the Dutch. I think it is the British who actually come up with but the people who ran the government, like eventually in the 80s, right? It becomes a worldwide global conflict,
Yeah.
right? Where everyone boycotting things from South Africa,
Mhm.
right? And they go to the Olympics and
I wanna take this a different direction and kind of
Ooh.
geek out a little bit on geography.
Okay, we can do that.
Okay. So, and with this
Yeah,
topic,
yeah.
okay. So if you think about exploration, the Europeans conquered the Americas,
Mhm.
right? And we know now that a lot of their ability to conquer the Americas was because of disease, right? They conquered much larger uh, groups of people like the Aztecs and Incas because of the smallpox and different diseases that their bodies weren't used to dealing with. Now, if you think
Oh,
geographically
this is again, yeah.
about Africa, it is one of the largest continents, and it's got the most um, land of any continent that is in the tropics. So the Europeans, in my opinion, they would have liked to have conquered Africa much sooner, but they couldn't. And here's why. So think about where England is. It's like, look, I'm going to say
It's like
55 degrees north
it's like
latitude.
latitude like Seattle.
Right.
Right.
And then
Yeah.
in South
Yeah.
Africa is 55 degrees south latitude. So when you went from England to South Africa, you could grow the same crops. Your animals survived this just like they did in England. The climate was very similar. But when they started to push north into the tropics,
Right.
African tribes did not create or build their settlements near water because of the diseases carried by mosquitoes.
Hmm.
And what do Europeans do? We build
Built
by
by water.
history,
Rivers.
rivers,
Yeah.
ponds, whatever, lakes. And so the Europeans would push up into this region. They would, in the tropics, they would settle near water and they would get the diseases that their bodies weren't able to handle from the
Kind of reverse.
yes.
Yeah, that's
and
nice.
so
Huh.
and their animals would die and they had all sorts of problems. And
That's
so
awesome. Yeah.
and so just the Industrial Revolution then is going to allow them to conquer Africa because of finally having the machine gun and some of these industrial
Trains.
things that yes
Guns, germs,
and steel.
Well, that's
which-
what, and I think
yeah.
it's that book that I read that also, to go on your point, it wasn't until Europeans come up with quinine,
yes,
right? Which is
Okay.
it's a cure, but it helps get rid of like malaria and things.
I
Right.
even think gin.
Right. Which is, yeah,
Gin was
gin
a
and tonic.
yeah. Well,
No,
that's
the tonic is
Oh.
quinine.
yes.
So that's why the gin and tonics become, because you drink the tonic
yes.
and it's quinine. It would help then.
Interesting.
So that was that.
But yeah, but I just think that's
cool.
fascinating.
I think that's
I love that.
fascinating
Yeah.
too.
Yeah,
that they
that's
can't
great.
go north.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Nice work.
Well, that's that
Yeah.
guns, germs, and steel. And again, not to geek out, but it's that lucky latitudes, right?
Yes.
Yep.
People can travel east to west along the same latitude,
Right.
climate, temperature, animals, but you go north or south into a different bio,
That's
and
really
it's
Yeah.
hard.
Yeah.
You can't do it.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I never
Right.
thought about that.
But if you look at Africa right now, they're having a malaria kind of surge again.
All right.
And it's
Mhm.
and if you think about so that the Europeans, right, imperialized Africa, and the European cities were built near water.
Yeah.
And that's where these people are living. you
Oh, yeah.
know,
I
Even
and-
today,
and-
yeah.
That's almost globally true that people build cities by
the
water.
water.
Always. That's the whole
Except-
idea, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Not in.
But anyway, I don't know. I
That's-
just thought that was
No, that's
No, I think that's a
interesting.
great-
That's
worth
like-
mentioning.
I
It's,
love
I think
that.
it's great.
Yeah.
But and not to go back to, but I remember like all of a sudden now thinking about apartheid, I was in college in the 80s and it was the flashpoint. I mean, you were boycotting companies that did business
Oh,
with
yeah, I
South
remember
Africa,
that, yeah.
governments. You were all about what they call divestment, right? You
Mhm.
wanted to get companies. I remember I went to school. We were all in on the university, had to divest its holdings in companies that invested in South
Yeah.
Africa.
It was on the nightly news. I mean,
Absolutely.
Nelson Mandela and all of
Stephen
that.
Biko, who's
Yep.
killed,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Yeah, but Nelson Mandela spends what, like
20
30
yeah,
years
20
or
some
something
years.
in
Yeah.
prison on Robben Island, and then when he's, it's what is it? Is it F.W. de Klerk, who was president at the
Yeah,
time, the
that
white
sounds right.
president? They all of a sudden, like literally, it's kind of like that same 89, 91 crazy period that
Yeah.
I talked about.
It is.
It's like 90, 91, and all of a sudden he says, you know what, apartheid is no longer.
Yeah.
It's hurting South Africa too much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then they do. We had first free elections, and Nelson Mandela is
wins.
elected. Yeah.
Yeah.
I come down to now. It's like epic when I kind of think back.
Yeah.
on it,
Oh, it's
right?
huge.
Well,
Yeah.
and I'm interested. Since then, what's the current state of South Africa? I'm curious. I don't know.
They're not
You know,
in the news very much anymore.
Well,
you know?
it is right now only because I don't know the actual current state, but right now, currently, right, there are white Europeans who are claiming sort of reverse racism, right, and being
Yes, that's right.
singled out and
Yeah.
then being
We
hurt,
accepted some here.
right, and so they're
Yeah.
accepting
that's right.
migrants, right,
That's right.
to the
Yeah.
U.S. because
Yeah.
they are being
So
persecuted,
Afrikaners.
Afrikaners, right?
So I don't know if does this fit in our time frame at all. There's 2 capitals.
Yeah.
South Africa.
Does that have anything to do with this? Is that
Well, there's
there's Cape Town and Pretoria, right?
so I think there used to be Johannesburg, but I think it's Pretoria.
Maybe
But
that's
I
what
think
I'm
it's
thinking. Okay.
Pretoria
Yeah.
is the actual
Capital.
capital. I think it was one of those where
Okay.
in order that but yeah, there are 2 different cities, but Pretoria is South Africa. But there's even a country within South Africa, right? That for the longest time was it Swaziland? That was
Yeah, there's
still an indigenous black, and then sort of went around it.
Wow.
there's 2 countries I think that are totally surrounded.
Yeah,
with South
I mean that's
Africa.
crazy.
So
yeah.
Lesotho.
yes,
That's it. It's Lesotho.
Wow.
Yeah.
Mm.
Right. So I mean it's an interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, but when Mandela was elected, I mean that was, and then did his wife Winnie, wasn't she elected or she
I
ran?
don't remember.
God, I mean that's bringing back all that sort of. But there was even a series of government sort of projects. What was it called? Trial. Anyway, where they had to go back and they had to issue basically a blanket pardon for all of the crimes that had been truth and reconciliation. That's what they called it. That if you came forward and admitted and told the story so they could figure out what happened to all these people for so long, that they would then not go to jail
Right.
for it. Right. Then they were
Right.
trying to just sort of
Pieces
bring it all out
Yeah.
and then deal with it. And then that was, I remember I used to teach when we taught those special, remember we taught those special geographic regions, and
Yeah.
Africa was one of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, Sub-Saharan Africa was one
Yeah.
of the regions. Back when we
Yeah.
also taught CIS.
So Jones, this is an opportunity for us to say when this all happened, we were in high school.
That's right. Yes, we're much younger than Mr. Reba.
Yes, you were.
Do we have time for another one?
I don't know.
What
What
do
do you think?
do we wanna-
Maybe if it's an easy one.
Yeah, let's try.
Should we power through one
Let's
here?
do one
I think it's my turn.
No tangents. Go right to the
No,
core.
all right, that's fair. Bolsheviks.
Ah,
Damn.
Yeah.
I mean, do a whole show on this. Hit it.
Well, I mean, I can just start with the Soviet Union's. The original revolution during World War I was the White Revolution, which was more of a democratic kind of a revolution. But Lenin, if you guys remember the name Vladimir Lenin, he led the Reds, right? And the Red
Civil War.
yeah.
Yeah.
in the Civil War, and then the Bolsheviks took over. Was it the Mensheviks?
There were 2 Bolsheviks and Mensheviks.
Bolsheviks.
Yeah.
And I guess I'll just cut to the chase. That's the beginning of communism in the Soviet
Right.
Union.
Yeah. So remember going into World War I, Russia had a czar, the
Yeah.
last czar,
Nicholas
the
II,
last
right?
Romanov czar,
Yep.
right?
Romanov,
Yeah.
And he and his family were sent to Siberia.
Or
Yes.
almost.
Yes.
Yeah. Didn't quite make it. But yeah.
And then Lenin and the Russian or the Soviet Revolution. And of course, then it leads to Stalin, who was extremely ruthless. But the Bolsheviks.
What Bolshevik means and Menshevik means, it's like one of them means
See,
it's like
that's what I was trying to think
more
of when I
than
was
or less
explaining.
than
I
or-
can't remember.
yeah, there's actually 2 revolutions, right? So there's
Yeah.
the overthrow of the czar, where there's a provisional democratic government led by Kerensky.
And if you look at history real quick on that, democratic government in Germany after World War II, the democratic government in Russia after
Italy,
the revolution, democratic government in Italy before Mussolini. Fledgling democracies are very hard to hang on to, especially when you've had a king or a singular figure in charge, basically telling everybody what to do. Sorry about that.
No, that's great. That's
Putin.
That's
Yeah.
Right. See,
Yeah.
Vladimir
but
Putin.
people always ask about that. How come the Russians? Well, the Russians have only known sort of an authoritarian.
Right.
strong.
That's a great point, actually. Right. Democracies are weak, and so it makes it easy.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Lenin led the Bolsheviks,
Right.
which then eventually overthrows Kerensky because the democracy is failing.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and if you think about it, a lot of these fledgling democracies early on, there's so many political parties that come about. And like, if you look, and I know this isn't a Bolshevik comment, this is a Germany comment. But
You make a lot of Bolshevik.
yeah. Post
There's a
World War
million
I.
jokes around that, right?
Right. There were so many parties, and in Germany, they weren't electing people. They were voting for the party.
Yeah.
So if you had 35% of the people vote for a single party, and
What's
they got
politics?
35.
Yeah.
Right. And yeah, they struggle. There's so many people with ideas trying to get their way.
So that's why they call the Bolshevik Revolution is actually the second revolution.
Yeah.
It's when the communists took over
Yeah.
and became the Soviet Union.
Yes.
What, 21? Well, there's a civil war in there too, right? That's what you're talking about, the
Yeah.
whites and the
Whites
reds.
So
and the reds.
that's I've always thought of it as there's two revolutions. There's the one that brings down the Tsar, and then there's the one that brings the Bolsheviks to
Right.
power.
Basically. And then there's a civil war between the whites who are backed up basically by the US and Europeans that are coming basically from the East, and then the Reds, and Trotsky really, and fighting for Russia, and the Reds win. It was that whole defending your homeland.
And there was communism. There were communist parties in a lot of countries at the time, and people were terrified, and so people were terrified of communism.
Yeah. Well, it led, I mean, after World War I, it led to the first Red Scare here in the United States.
Yeah,
and there was fear of Eastern Europeans being influenced by those ideas. Here's the thing is that a lot of those, what we would consider far left ideas like socialism and communism, were seen as a solution to the authoritarian governments. And then a lot of these socialist and communist governments became authoritarian too.
Yes. Well,
So,
and I would argue, you guys, maybe you'll argue with me here, but I would argue that we haven't ever truly gotten a finished, completed product of communism.
oh, not at all.
Right? Because
you can't.
Well, I'm going to argue with you.
The idea behind communism is that you get to a point where the society just runs itself, and the government just kind of dissolves and goes away. And we never got there.
Well, because the end of the Communist Manifesto is actually anarchy.
Yeah,
because everyone's happy.
Everybody's happy.
But
I would argue that's Marxism, and
Marxism
would argue what you're saying. There's never been a Marxist that communism can end in authoritarianism, which is not supposed to. But I mean, it always has.
Yeah,
I mean, it has, right. So,
which is why you have Marxism, Leninism, Stalinism.
Right. Yeah. And then Cuba's got a different form, and North Korea's got a different form.
Yeah,
right. So, but that's. I think we did pretty good. I would note too that I watch a lot of podcasts, and they've got laptops up or phones, and they're always like looking
nothing.
No, well,
not that I want to toot our own horn, but
I don't think I made up a story on this one either. I think I was pretty truthful.
Well, I think it'd be fun today. What do you guys think? Look, do we each want to try to pick somebody we'd have a beer with, since we're doing random acts of goofiness today?
Sure. Well, we have our topic. I was going to say.
So we got Battle of Hastings, apartheid.
Oh, that's a good one. That's okay.
All right, I'll take
trickle-down
apartheid. Okay. I would love to. I mean, you got to get Nelson Mandela.
Yeah.
I mean, just how would you not want to listen to that man who suffered in prison for so long, unjustly held, and then eventually is freed and becomes the first elected president? I mean, that the arc, but just the fact that, people talk about him still being a gentle, pure soul, that how you do that after being persecuted and jailed for so long, I would love to know.
That'd still be a nice guy.
Right.
Yeah.
You want to go, or do you want me to go?
You go.
I'm going to go with Tsar Nicholas II.
There you go. Good.
And I just think, it would be fascinating to, during that war and World War World War I, and was he feeling it slipping away? And did he ever consider giving in to what people wanted him to do to keep his crown's the wrong word, but keep his hold on Russia and just, I don't know. I just think it would be fascinating. And then, of course, just how terrifying it would have been to be swept off out of the capital and taken out.
Known.
Yeah.
Right. That's a great one.
Yeah.
That would be good.
I think I would go with U.S. Secretary of Treasury Andrew Mellon during the 1920s. And here's why.
Okay, tell us.
Hold on. And here, let me do one. And remember, you're a melon. What movie quote is that from, guys?
Oh, really? Do I have to back to school?
There you go.
Oh, yes. Oh, my gosh.
You're a Maloney.
You're Maloney.
And then you're a Mellon.
So Mellon was the Secretary of Treasury in the 20s, who really, this trickle-down topic that we had, he was the first to, Harding and Coolidge in the, early mid-1920s. And here's what I want to ask him, because, we talked about, does it work? It does, but.
Right.
And that's the answer to both, all this economic theory. It works, but. And I'd want to sit him down and say, all right, look, you started this in the 20s. We repeated it in the 80s. We've sort of been in that mode for a while. where do you go now? If Andrew Mellon in 2026 could look back and know what he knows, what we know now, how would he go with that? Because he really was kind of an economic genius at the time.
Yeah, but listen, he also, Mellon, it's like one of those like rubber bearers, right?
Yeah, completely.
Kind of
the
gilded
whole idea
age.
was we have all these people who are making all kinds of money. Let's let them run things.
Right.
Don't get me wrong. That's not like my theory. But I'd love to know in 2026 what he would say. Now, looking back, do you still buy that? Do you still believe that?
Yeah, there's the 1%, right?
Yeah,
there's the 1% that we hear about all the time now.
Yeah,
is that 1%?
1% of 1%
really trickling it down, or are they just getting to be more?
Do you
than 1%?
still believe it can work? Because there's some logic to the theory.
Mm-hmm. Just always, economics is typically amoral, right? So you don't bring things like that into human nature. It's you don't talk about that. It's economics. It's theory, right?
You want the numbers to work,
right? So
well,
I think we did a pretty good job. Congrats for the first random acts of history.
Please,
fun.
Yeah, other ideas you guys have for us, let us know.
Well, the bucket's pretty full.
Still
you want to add? That'd be great. And don't forget. Right,
merch.
We're gonna have the merch available.
Fox
so
Hill Wine and Spirits. Don't forget about them either. Please go buy some spirits, some wine.
And hey, tell your friends because we want people to get into it.
Love it. Thanks for watching and listening.
Class dismissed.